3 or 4 months ago, the morning group voted, I think when I was out of the room, that we would do minor prophets after finishing Jude here. And so, okay, we will, but it's going to take us, I believe, about 60 weeks. I don't know if you know this about me. When I was back in my 20s, I worked as a waiter at a 5-star Victorian restaurant. Tuxedo and everything. Okay? This was back in my hometown of Poynette, Wisconsin. There, the local lumber baron had a mansion dating back to the 1800s, and that became this restaurant in my early childhood. And almost everybody in our high school either worked there or tried to get a job there. But you didn't know this when you were younger. Just everybody, oh yeah, my brother worked there, my sister worked there. We didn't know this, but nobody worked there very long. So you got to be like 16 when you can legally work there, and you wanted to go work there. And then you found out, oh, this is why people quit. Coupled with a terrible boss who did not train her waiters. She just scolded us for doing it wrong. Not the way to train a waiter, right? She also made us pay for our own tuxedos. So therefore, how long did I work there? Long enough to pay off my tuxedo. And the only remnant of my tuxedo that still exists were the suspenders, which we used. I just remembered this the other day because I found it in our original high chair. We used my suspenders from my tuxedo to hold our kids into the high chair. So while I was working at the Jameson House as a waiter, a 7-course meal. And in between the courses, they served a special kind of a flavored ice. Do you know what that's called? A sorbet. Excellent. Yeah. Sorbet, and different flavors depending on what you had. You know, you had to serve a certain sorbet after the fish and so forth, and to clean the palate. That's what that's all about. And I'm telling you this because in the middle of the Minor Prophets, somewhere around Micah, we're going to have a sorbet, and I think it's going to be Philippians. We're just going to jump for one book, short book, 4-chapter book, into the New Testament, kind of cleanse the palate, and then get to the end of the Minor Prophets. So that's for my benefit and for yours. Okay? When I'm... I should start right away by saying, or asking you, why are they called the Minor Prophets?
They were under 18 when they wrote.
That is the only wrong answer. They were already being called this in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And it was St. Augustine who said, they are only minor in length and not in message. Minor in length, major in message. And some of them are not all that short. Daniel, for example, has 12 chapters, but he's a major prophet. Hosea and Zechariah both have 14 chapters. So some of the minor prophets are not all that minor. But nevertheless, we have this list in the Old Testament. It is not always easy to memorize your books of the Old Testament. Can you be honest? How many of you have memorized the list of Old Testament books in your head? Can you rattle them off quickly? It isn't...
Yeah, I have. Not anymore.
Oh, not anymore? Okay. When I teach them to the catechism kids, New Testament books, I can teach the entire list in under 5 minutes, and they have it learned. It's possible. With Old Testament books, it's 5, 3, 3, 3, 5, 3, 5. And then the minor prophets, because it's 5 books of Moses, then it's 3 Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then 3 doubles, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, and then 3 more historical books, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, 5 poetry books, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. 5 major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. But then it's the 12 minor prophets. Okay? But the 12 minor prophets can be done, and I think are most easily done in a 3-3-2-4 pattern. Repeat after me. Hosea, Joel, Amos.
Hosea, Joel, Amos.
Obadiah, Jonah, Micah.
Obadiah, Jonah, Micah.
Now slow down. Nahum, Habakkuk.
Nahum, Habakkuk.
Now, remember when you were little on the playground and there were snarky kids who were kind of naughty in the way they said stuff? So now you do that with your head and you go, with this tone of voice, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Okay? So let's try that. Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Okay? And then you'll remember the end of the minor prophets. About the time that the first Lord of the Rings movie came out, 2000, what was it, 8 or something like that, or whatever year it was, kids in my catechism class began knowing what hobbits were. And I had an idea one day about how to teach them the minor prophets with an acronym. But my kids were still little enough to be reading Winnie the Pooh, so it's kind of a jamming together of Tolkien and Winnie the Pooh. But it goes like this. Hobbits just always open jars. Midnight honey. Okay. This and of course they stand for Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Okay. If that's how you spell, and so forth. But anyway. So I find it easier to divide the prophets the way I have for you on your handout. Do I still have one? Probably. Yeah. Into the periods of the divided kingdom. All the minor prophets fit into the divided kingdom. Okay? I don't know if that helps you. You're aware that Israel history is, after Genesis, it's the years of Moses and Joshua. Then it's the years of the judges and so on. Then the years of the United Kingdom. Who are the first 3 kings of Israel? Saul, David, Solomon. The literary writing prophets come after that in the time, because Samuel's not one of those. I know Moses was. But all the other prophets come from the divided kingdom following the death of Samuel. We begin with the early divided kingdom. Death of Solomon, 930 BC. And for about 100 years, down to 830 BC, the early divided kingdom, the kings of Judah go from the first king of Judah, Rehoboam, down to bad queen Athaliah. It also includes the terrible king Ahab. I just wrote in my email devotions about his death about 2 days ago. And then his wife, who is Jezebel, such a wicked woman that I wondered if Pastor Sharp was going to say this in his sermon on Sunday, because he talked about Jezebel, but he didn't say this. But in the book of Revelation, her name turns up again, standing for all the wickedness of the earth. I will call her Jezebel, and so forth. But so Ahab and Jezebel are in this time period too. And you have prophets like Elijah and Elisha. Do you know how to find Elijah and Elisha in your Bible? Do you know where to look?
Between the covers.
Let's be more precise than that. If you find the division between 1st and 2nd Kings, okay, you have found the division between Elijah on the one side and Elisha on the other. From about halfway through 1 Kings to the end is the story of Elijah. He actually ascends into heaven in about 2 Kings chapter 2, but most of the Elijah stories are before that in 1 Kings. And then the Elisha stories are at the beginning of 2 Kings. Elisha has like 14 miracles. If you list Elisha's miracles, you yourself can easily say, oh, Jesus did this one, Jesus did this one, Jesus did this one, Jesus did this one. So it's the division between 1st, 2nd Kings. None of the Elijah-Elisha stories are in Chronicles. So that's not part of the book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. There is a letter from Elijah that someone reads in Chronicles, but none of that stuff is in. So how does 1st and 2nd Chronicles get so long? It also doesn't have anything about the northern kings. Well, because it has 9 chapters of genealogy from Adam to Saul. So that's where Chronicles gets fleshed out like that. But Elijah, Elisha are in Kings, and you have Micaiah, Hanani, and Jehu. When you're reading along in some of the historical books, you'll read at the death of certain kings. Okay? There'll be a little formula. And are not all the rest of the acts of King Jehoshaphat written in the books of the annals of the king of Israel by Jehu, son of Hanani? You know, that kind of stuff. So these other guys are writing some of those chronicle books that are not part of the Bible, except that they get maybe kind of quoted as scripture here and there. Also, do you see that I have Obadiah with a certain punctuation? Because I don't know if this is the Obadiah who wrote the book of Obadiah. We'll talk about that. But Obadiah, he shows up here because wicked Queen Jezebel tried to kill 100 prophets of God, and a guy named Obadiah hid them away in some caves. And this is in the time of Elijah, Elisha. A very wonderful thing. But we don't know if that was the prophet Obadiah or not. Later on, the prophet Obadiah is quoted by one of the last of the writing prophets, who was Jeremiah. So is he closer to Jeremiah's time, or is he closer to the beginning? And I want to tell you a true story. When I was at the seminary, I had back-to-back Hebrew classes one year, 4th hour and 5th hour, right? In 4th hour, the professor insisted that Obadiah was late in the time of Jeremiah, and the prof I had 5th hour insisted that Obadiah was early from the time of the prophet Joel. So there's a question mark there. So I'm going to leave the question mark. And Mark, go ahead.
I've always been curious, are there any fragments or records of the
I didn't hear anything you just said. I'm sorry.
Are there any fragments or records of the annals of the kings of Israel?
Only what's in the Bible. Only what's in the Bible. Nothing, no little fragment of anything that's ever been found. If there were, wouldn't it be cool?
Yeah.
The problem is, might somebody be tempted to stick it in the Bible? I would think that it might end up in like the introductions or the footnotes or something like that, but I wouldn't want someone to start sticking it into the scriptures and questioning, like, should this verse actually say something else? Like, well, what about King Jotham's wife's birthday party that's in this fragment we have? You know, shouldn't we be preaching on that? Because you know someone's going to start preaching on that. You know, I knew a minister, not of our fellowship, who would come downstairs on Sunday morning, get her cup of coffee, and open up the newspaper and say these words, well, what am I going to preach on today? How would you like a pastor like that? Her congregation had her for 20 years. You know, and she would, and then she would sit down on the little ledge, the step below the altar, still with her coffee on Sunday morning, and give her talk that way. I won't call it a sermon, but so Obadiah, I don't know where he came from. Early divided kingdom, middle divided kingdom, which ends with the fall of the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom got carried away, pop quiz, to what country? The northern tribes went where? I heard it. The Assyria. Assyria. Yeah. So they went away to the Assyrian kingdom in 722. And here we have prophets with much more familiar names. Joel, Jonah, Amos, Hosea, Micah, Isaiah. And some of those guys carry over after the fall into the next period. And especially Hosea, Micah, and Isaiah. They carry over. But they were not taken away to the north. I mean to Assyria. Even though, for example, Hosea was preaching to the north, he didn't get wrapped up in that captivity. So he's still going after they're gone for a while. Then we come to the late kingdom, from the taking away of the north to the taking away of the south. And that captivity was to where?
Babylon.
Yeah, that's the easier one. Babylon, 586. For kings, we have Hezekiah to Josiah and his sons. The last kings of Israel are all sons of Josiah. And the fall of Judah in 586. And there we have prophets like Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. I didn't talk about Habakkuk. I will talk about Habakkuk when his time comes. His name isn't even Hebrew. Habakkuk's name is Akkadian, which is what they spoke in Assyria. Curious guy. His name translates as Gordy, because that's what Habakkuk means, gourd, in Akkadian. So Gordy, right? Remember the Monster Mash? Remember the line at the Bobby Pickett says, "Tell them Gordy sent you." In the Monster. There you go. Yeah. Still have my 45. But then there are these guys in that same list. The major prophets, apart from Isaiah, also get carried off to Babylon, and in reverse order. So Daniel goes first. In the very first transportation of exiles to Babylon, Daniel leaves. Ezekiel goes second. And Jeremiah, I got to translate Jeremiah for the Evangelical Heritage Version. And I did a study of the book, which became one of my first 2-volume printed commentary after that. And I still feel like I didn't do the book justice. Jeremiah should probably be a 4 or 5-volume commentary. It's just amazing. But the prophet Jeremiah is in chains to go to be deported, to walk to Babylon from Jerusalem. Okay, about a 3-month walk in chains. Can you imagine? And the Babylonian field commander Nebuzaradan recognizes him. "Oh, I know you. I've heard you preach." And he walks up to him with a key and unlocks him. And leaves Jeremiah there, and then hauls everybody else. He goes, "You can stay, and we're all going to go." And then giddy up, and off they go, right? And then, do you know what happened to Jeremiah after that? This is such a cool story. Because it's not part of the minor prophets. I'm going to tell you. So if you can imagine Dodge City, 1880, right? The sheriff's office is right there. And across the street is Miss Kitty's restaurant, the Long Branch Saloon, right? That's where we are in Jerusalem. I'm sure there was a Long Branch, and there certainly were tumbleweeds. That's in the Bible. So it really is. And the Babylonians had either killed or imprisoned all the kings. There's no more king in Jerusalem or Judah. But there is the king's nephew in the line of the tribe of Judah. He ends up in the genealogy of Jesus, and his name is Gedaliah, and they make him governor. Now, out in the street is Jeremiah and his secretary. Jeremiah's secretary's name was Baruch. We have his thumbprint. Baruch's thumbprint. And the reason we have it is that when Jerusalem was burned, their chamber of records was burned also. And Baruch had signed something, probably a deed to a sale of land or something, with his signet ring. You know, you wore your signet ring, and it had Jeremiah, son of, on it, and who he was. It's the Jeremiah that was Isaiah's scribe, right? But when he pressed the ring into the clay, because they sealed these scrolls with, I remember my mother had cloth napkins when we were kids, and they had napkin rings. That's what these things look like, these things that hold a scroll. They were clay, and the signet ring thing is called a bulla. And when he pressed the bulla into the clay, he had his thumb on top of it, and his thumbprint is in the clay. And then they burned the building down. So the document is gone, but it fired the clay like a kiln. And now we have Baruch's thumbprint and his name, his signature. So pretty cool. It's one of the best, in my opinion, of the archaeological finds, along with the Lachish ostraca, little letters, post-it notes, messages during the destruction of Jerusalem from the field commanders at Lachish and Azekah to the commander in Jerusalem, as city by city, garrison by garrison, fell to the Babylonians. And at one point, the commander at Lachish says, "We can still see your signal fires, but we can no longer see Azekah. There are only 2 left." And a chill just goes down your spine when you're reading this, because you can find the passage where that happens in Chronicles. And that's the actual document. Like you were saying, Mark, do they have any of this stuff left? You know, and there's one that is left, but it's not like a historical summary. It's an original document from the field commander. It's the message that got passed to Jerusalem with a runner. So pretty cool stuff. So back to Dodge City, right? Gedaliah is in the saloon, the new governor. Jeremiah and his scribe are out in the street. And Jeremiah just got done preaching a sermon saying, all of us who are left here, we have to stay in Jerusalem. Don't be tempted to go to Egypt. You'll only survive if you stay here. God will look after us here. And then what happens? Well, it's Dodge City. So what sound do you expect in Miss Kitty's saloon? Bang, 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 bang! They shoot Gedaliah dead. Well, probably stabbed him. But anyway, so the governor, the Babylonian appointed governor is dead. And the gangsters who did it, the Jesse James gang or whatever, they run out into the street, run headlong into Jeremiah and Baruch. And what do? Get on your horses, boys. We're heading to Egypt. And off they go. Right after Jeremiah said, don't go to Egypt, they take Jeremiah to Egypt. And he ends up in a city called Taphanes on the eastern Nile Delta. And the cool thing about this, if I can just go on with this, because it is so cool, is that at Taphanes, the Jews, there's a big community of Jews there. They build a duplicate, as far as they can remember, an exact copy of the temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, but 1/2 the scale. The thing is, Solomon's temple was built double the scale of the tabernacle. So they have just rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem to the same scale as the tabernacle in granite in the city of Taphanes. There are Egyptian government employees who say it's still there. It is not an archaeological site. It is a church. It's a synagogue. But once a year, they have a parade. They bring out an artifact from the Holy of Holies in their half-scale temple. And guess what they have? The Ark of the Covenant. And it's covered, and they have a parade, and they announce to everybody, so to keep thieves away, this is a replica of the Ark. It is not the original Ark. But they parade it around, and people throw flowers and things, and they have this parade every October at the Great Day of Atonement. They have this parade and so forth. Except the rumor is that about every 7 or 11 years, the one they bring out is the Ark of the Covenant. That it's actually there. And which could be, with respect to Steven Spielberg, it could be the actual Ark of the Covenant that they have in Taphanes in Egypt. So, kind of cool stuff. All right. As far as we know, Jeremiah died there in the end. There is another group of minor prophets that at the return of the exile in 585, until Malachi's time in 430, they rebuilt Jerusalem. They rebuilt the temple. This is called Zerubbabel's temple. It's the second temple. That Herod in the New Testament did not build a temple. He only added to Zerubbabel's temple. So there is no Herod's temple. But these are prophets like Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and incidentally, Ezra, Nehemiah, and finally Esther come from the same time period. Esther and Malachi are probably contemporaries, around 430, 440 BC. That's it. The Old Testament ends there. Okay? And then 400 years later, John the Baptist shows up and says, look, the Lamb of God's right there. So, anything on the background? Go ahead, Mark.
Were you aware that Sennacherib's column, victory column, was discovered?
Yeah.
I camped around Jerusalem. I had 100,000 soldiers, and I, Sennacherib, returned.
Yeah.
No soldiers.
Yeah. Anybody else? Did I see their hand? Anybody? Don't mind. Okay. All right. Let's go. Now, that's the minor prophets. Now, I'm entering into Hosea. We're going to take the minor prophets in the order that they're given in Scripture. That's almost always the same order. There are a couple of copies of the Old Testament in Greek where a couple of the minor prophets are switched around. It's no big deal. But we'll take them in the order that we have them. Okay? Hosea, Joel, Amos, and so on. So, beginning here with Hosea, a prophet and a prophetic life. Hosea seems to be the only one of the writing prophets to be speaking to the northern kingdom who was also from the northern kingdom. So Jonah also came from the north, from Gath-Hepher, but he's a prophet to Nineveh, not to the northern kings. So I can kind of... And then that depends on Obadiah, but again, I'm confused about Obadiah. I hope I don't confuse... Obadiah is certainly part of the scriptures. Just where does he go? I'm not sure. He's kind of like Jude in that sense, isn't he? Like, I'm not really sure where he goes, but it's scripture. All right. This is Hosea's family tree. His father's name is Beeri. There is a Reubenite named Beeri in 1 Chronicles 5. It could be the same guy. And it would fit because Hosea, we think, is a northern prophet. I just wrote about this a couple days ago. It's a battle called the Battle of Ramoth Gilead, where King Ahab of Israel was killed. That's the king who was trying to disguise himself, and some guy shot an arrow and went in between the chinks of his armor and killed him anyway. He's Jezebel's husband, but he's killed. At that mountain, Ramoth Gilead, which is... Okay, here I'm holding up my arm. My fist is the Sea of Galilee. My forearm is the Jordan River. And down here below my elbow is the Dead Sea. Okay, and over on this side would be all of Israel, basically. But over on this side, there is stuff. Okay? And somewhere below the Sea of Galilee, and then over this way out in the desert, is this mountain fortress called Ramoth Gilead. Okay? And at Ramoth Gilead, on the next hill over, is a hill that's called something like Jebel Hosea. It's the hill of Hosea. And they think that that's the tomb of the prophet Hosea. So it's also on that's where Tishbe is, which is where Elijah the Tishbite came from. So just an interesting piece of geography there. So Hosea from the north, he is going to be asked by God here at the beginning of the book to marry a prostitute. He marries a woman named Gomer. I used to, when I taught Hosea when I was younger, I used to insert a joke there involving the phrase, surprise, 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 but I won't tell that today. And then they have 3 children at least. Jezreel, the first one, who is a son, Lo-Ruhamah, a daughter, and Lo-Ami, who is a son. And that carries us through because the book tells us that she's waiting for the first one to be weaned before she has the next one. So these kids are spaced out a little ways. How long in modern times, how old is a child before he's weaned or she? In modern times.
That's the first 2 months.
Between 1 and 2,
Yeah, somewhere, right?
usually. Could be
1.5 in there somewhere generally. Although I will tell you that Kath and I had, when we were pregnant the first time, our, what is she called? The OBGYN, she's our gynecologist, our baby doctor. She was, not only was she going to deliver Jonathan, she was doing our classes, our Lamaze classes and stuff, so it was cool to have her for everything. And she's telling us, and Kath is asking her a lot of questions that I would never have thought of. And one of them is about weaning a child, how old and stuff. And our doctor, she said, well, just between us, I won't say her name out loud, she goes, I think I went too long the first time. Because we had a bunch of people over for a birthday party or something. And my toddler walked up to me, pointed at my chest and said, those, I want those. And probably old enough to be weaned at that point. When you're like 2.5 or 3 or whatever that was. But 2.5 or 3 is probably what we're talking about in the Old Testament for being weaned. Because as long as the child is being nourished by mama's milk, let the child go. As long as she can take it, let it go. So we might have 2 or 3 years in between these babies. Spaced out, which, by the way, I approve of, because if you're going to pay for college, you want them, especially now that what happened yesterday, our president canceled federal grants, including Pell grants. College money just dried up yesterday. It's gone. So I think Eric's tuition is going to go way up. Maybe next month, we'll see. Well, to get to Hosea's own chronology, very briefly, this is Hosea's chronology. So the 790s to 720s, this period. Jeroboam the second. There are 2 Jeroboams in the Bible. Jeroboam the first is the one who divided the divided kingdom. That's in 930. Now, let's see, 100, 200, or 150 years later, I'll say, another Jeroboam comes along, and this guy, the Lord's judgment of him is just as bad as the first one. So not a great king. King of Israel, you have Uzziah, a king down in Judah. That's the beginning of Isaiah's prophecies. You have Jonah, we can date more specifically. And then Hosea, about in this time period, shortly after Isaiah, Jonah, Amos may have been working also. Then Hosea's first message and marriage, and the approximate date for the beginning, of Amos's ministry, and this other king named Zechariah. And there are lots of other things going on here. I'm not going to go through all of them with you, but there's always more chronology if you like. Okay. A very brief outline of the book. If you want to turn to the top of page 2 in your handout, we're kind of getting to the point where we're going to start chapter 1 finally. Hosea could have a 3-part outline, which would be a 1-verse introduction, a 3-chapter thing about the unfaithful wife and faithful husband, and then a 10-chapter chunk of unfaithful nation, faithful God. Really, that's what Hosea is. There's this image that God uses, a sort of live-action parable. Hosea, go marry an unfaithful prostitute wife, God says, because that's what I did when I married Israel. So that's the illustration. And however, there's some gospel in here too coming up. But that's what we have. And that's kind of the whole book. But that last section has a thing about Israel's unfaithfulness, Israel's punishment, but then the Lord's faithful love. So, but that's basically Hosea. Okay. And I'm going to skip over some stuff because I was going to walk you through every important king and prophet during these years. And it would take us probably till about 9 o'clock. The last time I taught the book, that took 2 class periods. So I'm not going to do it. Okay? But we're going to get into the book now. So Hosea 1, this is from the old NIV, I think, but Hosea chapter 1, not too many verses, but we'll walk through it here. First, the word of the Lord that came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. Notice he begins with the word of the Lord. In the northern kingdom, you have Jeroboam. Both of the Jeroboams have set up calf idols way, way up north in a village called Dan. And down south, just north of Jerusalem, was the city of Bethel. It had been a place where like Samuel had worshiped, but now it's gone, and they turned it into an idol worship. And the first Jeroboam had invited anyone and everyone who wanted to be a priest or priestess of this new religion, this calf religion, and they could just come and jump on it. It was like getting an online pastor's degree or something. Anybody, and he filled up the temples and the shrines with all kinds of men and women who were now priests and priestesses of the calves. But there were still Levitical priests of the Lord in the north as well. So there were them around too. They weren't always the best, but they were still guys who were worshiping God as opposed to Baal or something like that. So there was just a mixture up north. Can you imagine you'd go to a birthday in your family, and well, we're going to go to church first. Are you going to go to the Lord's temple, or are you going to go to Moloch's temple, or going to go visit the Baal shrine, or where are you going to go? You know, and your family would that like our families have a mixed religion or mixed denominations so often today. It must have been heartbreaking to those people. Just like it's heartbreaking to so many of us. I don't like to have mixed denominations in my family, but I do. And it is hard because you're not in fellowship. That's actually our catechism class for tomorrow. The meaning of the church and what is church fellowship and why aren't we in fellowship with some people. Can I tell you a story about Pastor Henning? Mark, you didn't know Pastor Henning, did you?
I know his son.
There you go. Pastor Thomas Henning served here at St. Paul's for more than 30 years. 40 years altogether in his ministry, which included 3 years in the Pacific Northwest. It's that time period I'm going to talk about, back in 1960. So Tom is a young seminary student. He graduates in the spring of 1960. And if I have my details correct, he and Elaine did what they did back then, which was they expected a seminary student to be single all through SEM, but to be married when he got to his first call. Right? So that's what Tom did. He and Elaine were engaged. He was single all through SEM, then they got married, and then he was assigned, and then they were married, and they went out there, and that was their honeymoon. Well, Tom decided, because he was assigned to King County, Washington. In fact, his church was 10 miles north of my mission church in King County, Washington. Tom and I also shared the same birthday. We both were there for 2.5 years and got called to St. Paul's, New Ulm. We both had a son named Peter right after we got to New Ulm. It gets even creepier. It goes on and on and on. I've now been here 25 years, and he was here just around 36 years or something like that. If I can keep plugging, I'll beat him. But we'll see. So Tom has an interview with his district president, the guy from out west, at the seminary, right? And he says his district president is not from the Seattle area, which is where Tom is going. This is, from your perspective, this is a map of Washington State. This is Puget Sound. Where my finger touches here is the general area of Seattle and Tacoma. And in between Seattle and Tacoma, there's an airport called SeaTac, which stands for Seattle-Tacoma. And then there's a place called Bremerton, which is a big naval station and so forth. And this is the Olympia Peninsula. And then these are the Cascade Mountains. And this over here is desert. Most of the state, right? Well, over here is Spokane, which you might have pronounced Spokane until just now, but it's Spokane, Washington. Okay? Walla Walla is here, but I'm talking about Spokane. His district president lived in Spokane and was a pastor there. So everything's fine. Spring of 1960, Tom and Elaine, with the district president's blessing, say we're going to do a honeymoon by driving across the country with our trailer, our pop-up trailer, and we're going to see the Devil's Tower in Wyoming, and we're going to see Mount Rushmore, we're going to see the Black Hills, we're going to go to Wall Drug, and do all the things that you do going out west, right? And do all that, and they did all of that. They were trying to spend as little money as possible because they had no money. But the DP, the district president, said, stop in. When you get there in a month or 2 months or whatever it's going to be, stop and see me in Spokane. I'll put you guys up for the night. Then I'll drive over the mountains with you. We'll find your church and I'll get you settled and do all that. Everything's fine, right? Tom and Elaine do that. They spend, I don't know if it was 6 weeks or 8, but they spent a lot of time just vacationing, honeymooning, and doing stuff. And but in the meantime, it's the summer of 1960. Now, that might not mean anything to you, but that summer, 70 Wisconsin Synod pastors lost their temper. They ran out of time and patience with the Synod for being so patient with the Missouri Synod for the last 15 years. And they said, we cannot be in fellowship with Missouri. We're leaving. And they formed the Church of the Lutheran Confession, the CLC. Tom's district president was one of those men. So they get to Spokane, and he won't even open the door. He will not. He talks to him through the screen, but he will not open the door. He won't say, God bless you. He just says, I'm sorry, we're no longer in fellowship. Good luck to you. And he closes the door. So now what do? They don't know anybody. But Tom says, wait a second, I do know a guy. He was 4 years ahead of me in school. His name is Ralph Bauer. And he's somewhere in Seattle. They drive to Seattle, and what do? They stop at a phone booth, and they get out a phone book, and they look up Ralph's phone number and call, and Ralph and Lila are home. And he tells Ralph this, and Ralph says, come here. And they drive to Ralph and Lila's house, and he puts them up for the night. And Ralph and Tom become best of friends. Basically, at that, they were only acquainted before that, but now their friendship is sealed. Later on, both of them come to New Ulm, or the New Ulm area. Ralph Bauer was pastor at, help me, do you know, Brad? Was it not Sleepy Eye, but further out? Was it Sanborn? I think maybe that Ralph was in Sanborn forever and ever. And then he kind of filled in also at Cortland for a while. But Ralph was around kind of helping out. And even in my time, Lila, was a member here after Ralph passed away. And but Pastor Bauer and Pastor Henning were very, very close to each other. So that the idea of fellowship was really brought home into Tom's lap at that moment, Pastor Henning's lap. But fellowship, when things are pulled apart, is a heartbreaking thing in families. So let's go into verse 2 and just see what's going on here. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, take to yourself an adulterous wife and children of unfaithfulness," although they're not born yet, but they're going to be born, "because the land is guilty of the vilest adultery in departing from the Lord." So are we to understand that Hosea, God's prophet, actually married a prostitute? Yeah. Yeah, that's what God told him to do. Okay. God told his prophets to do some pretty wild things. Ezekiel had this going on as well. But with Hosea, my life is going to illustrate God's relationship with Israel. But thank the Lord, there was going to be gospel. So please keep that in mind. There's going to be gospel down the road here. But there's this part too. So he married Gomer's daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And that's his picture. The Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel." Jezreel. That's a place in the northern kingdom. And something had happened there. I'll walk us through. So call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel. I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel. How useful is a broken bow?
It's not useful.
Not useful. Now, a curious thing is that in American Indian culture, the expression broken bow is an expression of a peace treaty. You break the bow. That wasn't for them. Broken bow is defeat in Israel. I want to be clear about that. So we have a different expression in our language. I'll come back to Jehu. I wanted to talk about this verse, though. God's judgment came to Jehu's house in the form of this little rhyme, almost. Vishavarti et sheket et keshet Yisrael be'emech Yisrael. Israel and Jezreel sound very similar. And it's possible that God was intending this as a rhyme, which isn't easy to do in Hebrew. Isaiah does a little bit, Hosea here, but I will shatter the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. That's the thing. Now, I have two drawings from the margins of my study Bible here. I'm really amazed that they turned out as well as they do on the screen, but they're pretty small little sketches from the margin of my Bible. But here we have Israel at this time. I'll just point with the pointer here, but in the upper left, you have the only interesting thing on the coast of Israel is Mount Carmel. That's that little jog right there. And from the base of Mount Carmel comes the Jezreel Valley, and the hill of Megiddo overlooks that valley. That's why all the battles happen there at Megiddo. Notice, though, that Jezreel at this time is north of where Israel and Samaria were. That the Assyrians have already beat back Israel so far that there's practically nothing left. This is, it's just a little bit bigger than Benjamin was. It's really not that much. They've got Bethel, Gibeah, Samaria, and that's kind of it for Israel. But God is saying what happened up here I'm going to pay you back for that. And that's what we should talk about, is what did happen there. But I have a sketch of what it looks like. I thought I'd show you that. So this is looking west from about Nazareth, which is in the upper right corner. You have that hill looking into the Jezreel Valley. Mount Carmel is on the right, and the pass of Megiddo. The city of Jezreel down there in the valley where the river is. But you can see how steep things are. Remember, Nazareth was so steep that there was a cliff they were going to throw Jesus off of. So it's a very steep thing. The Jezreel Valley is the obvious place to move armies through and stuff like that. Is your hand up, Mark? Go ahead.
What is the width of the features in the drawing?
You have the valley itself?
Yeah, is it miles or hundreds of miles?
No, it's dozens of miles. Like, I don't know if it's like 20 or 30, but it's and you've got like the Mount Tabor and stuff are in there, but it's the part that's down low is enough that like a family could walk through and not necessarily be noticed by a lookout, but not an army. That clear enough? Yeah. So, did you have a question? No? Hi, Dave. Welcome. Marcia, your husband's here. Just okay. Yay. She goes, yay. All right. Let's talk about this Jezreel thing, though. So Jehu, there are two Jehus in the Bible, and they're both in this chapter. I've mentioned them both. One was a prophet. This is the king, a king of the north of Israel. Jehu was anointed by Elisha. Remember that God tells Elijah, go do these things quick before you run away. And he goes, anoint Jehu to be king of Israel, anoint this other guy to be king of Aram, and anoint Elisha to be your successor. So Elijah does that, and I have it misspelled. I've got Elisha there, but it should be Elijah. But Jehu is anointed by Elijah to end the sins of Ahab and Jezebel. It ends the only dynasty of the northern kingdom, which is a four-generation dynasty from Ahab down to the whole house of Omri, which goes down to Joram. That's the only dynasty in the north. Otherwise, it's like guy killing guy. But there was a little bit of a dynasty for after Omri. It's called the Omrid dynasty. You ever see that word? That's what that's referring to, is this dynasty. So then Jehu killed Joram, Ahab's son. He killed Jezebel. Anybody remember how Jezebel met her end? Yeah, they threw her out of a window, and the dogs got her, and there was nothing left to bury. Ugh. You know, that's. There's an expression in German. Is it Totenstoß? It's he killed him. Not just he killed him, but he killed him dead. Like, okay, well, what's the deal? Well, he's really dead. He's deader than dead, yeah. And so he destroyed Ahab's family, killed the ministers of Baal, and from the Lord's perspective, kind of so far so good. He's supposed to do these things, but he did not turn the country away from the idolatry of Jeroboam. So Jehu almost is a good king in the north, but he didn't turn away the people from the idolatry. So that's Jehu. I have one more thing to say about Jehu, because when I was studying and doing research for the first Shakespearean play I directed, which was King Lear, I found the comment more than once that King Lear in England ruled about the time that Jehu was king in Samaria. So the 700s BC. So King Lear is based on at least a legendary story in England. He's not just made up by Shakespeare. But really old stuff. That's about the same time as Homer in Greece. That's the time period we're in here. Okay. Gomer conceived again, gave birth to a daughter. The Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo-Ruhamah. Lo-Ruhamah means I don't love you. Can you imagine Hosea and Gomer have got their kids in the stroller. They're going to the grocery store, right? They're pulling stuff off the shelves. They've got their Honey Nut Crunch or whatever, and they've got milk and butter and eggs and so forth. And the neighbor lady, Mrs. Egger comes along. Oh, your baby. What's your baby's name? Our baby's name is I Don't Love You. And what does she do? She says, why would you call your baby that? And Hosea preaches a sermon. Because the Lord does not love. I will no longer show love to the house of Israel, that I should at all forgive them. So it's a constant sermon. And you know what? He's not just going around buying groceries. He's taking his kids around on mission preaching trips to Bethel and over almost as far as Jericho and up to Samaria and around and around and around, doing the circuit. And by the way, my wife had a new baby. Here he is. Here she is. Isn't she pretty? Her name is I Don't Love Her. That's his sermon. But look at verse 7. Yet I will show love to the house of Judah. I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but by the Lord their God. Who is he going to show love to? Judah. Who does the Lord not love? Israel. So Israel rejected, Judah loved or rescued. This is the sermon. Oh, except we're not done yet. After she had loaned Lo-Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. And the Lord said, call him Lo-Ami. Isn't he a cutie? Little hat. This little mezuzah. Lo-Ami means not mine. Or not my people. Yeah. What's his name? He's not mine. Can you? Isn't it though? That's his sermon. And by the way, we think maybe this was true. That Gomer is having these babies because he goes off to preach and she's still living as a prostitute. So yeah, they don't he may as well named one of them Lo Oznayim. He doesn't have my eyes, does he? Something like that, oh no, that was, I said he doesn't have my ears. But anyway, the same deal. But so, and after she had, you are not my people. Lo-Ami, not mine, not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not your God. That's serious law preaching. Little chronology. I think that Hosea is called around 760, about 40 years before Israel is going to fall. Birth of Jezreel, maybe the next year. A couple years later, because of weaning, we have Lo-Ruhamah, and then a couple years later, Lo-Ami, around 753, 31 years maybe before the fall of Samaria, which means that these kids would have been grown when maybe just in time to get carried off to Assyria, never to come home again. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called sons of the living God. This is to Israel. Now, remember the map I showed you? Israel no longer had seashore on the Mediterranean side. Where did they have seashore? No, not Israel. That's Judah. Sea of Galilee. Who called them sons of the living God at the Sea of Galilee? Well, Jesus did. This is a prophecy of Jesus. There's real, pure gospel in the book of Hosea. Do you mind? We're right at 7. Can I tell you one more story? If you know what a vicar is, that's a seminary student in his 3rd year who goes and he is free slave labor to a pastor for 51 weeks. Okay? No, I'm kidding. He's like an assistant to the pastor. He preaches in theory about every 6 or 8 weeks, although some of us preached every other week. But it depends on the bishop. And then the bishop gets 1 week off between the last vicar and the next one. He has only 1 week off to rest. the bishop. Usually takes a vacation, then comes back and, okay, new vicar. And so on and on. During my vicar year, I was in the inner city of Milwaukee. There were a lot of drug addicts, a lot of alcoholics everywhere. Everybody was an alcoholic, member, non-member, visitor, business people, the cops, everybody. We were right on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I did campus ministry at 7 colleges. Sunday was an eternity of visit. Sunday, I would get home to Kath and Jonathan at about 8 o'clock at night because I had been doing that many church services. When I got to St. Paul's and they said 3 church services on Sunday, I said, that's a breeze. I get home at noon and not 8? This is going to be pretty cool. This is a sweet gig. Okay. Cass said, don't call it a gig. I just called it a gig. One day, we also had homeless people. One day, a Jewish rabbi walks in. This is not a joke. A rabbi named Rabbi Warren Cohen, or Khan, walks in, an actual rabbi, and he says, I was struggling with alcohol. I went to the Salvation Army, learned about Jesus, but I want to know more. They couldn't tell me anymore. He said, Vicar, if you can show me Jesus in the Old Testament, I'll become your member. I will stop calling myself a rabbi. I will become your janitor. If you can show me Jesus, I'll be a servant here. And I said, where would you like me to show you Jesus? And he said, well, I've read all the Bible except for the minor prophets. I said, let's go to the minor prophets. And for 12 weeks, and I just said that. I didn't think it through. Show him Jesus in each of the 12 minor prophets. So I thought about it afterwards, and my bishop said, what did you do? And I said, I'll do it. I said, I'm confident. And so I studied each week, but we met, and I showed him Christ like this. Hosea, Joel, Amos. I had just preached a sermon on Amos, on rebuilding David's fallen tent and so forth. Jonah, 3 days and 3 nights in the belly. Micah, but thou Bethlehem Ephrathah, and so forth. Showed him, even in Obadiah, showed him Christ in every book of the minor prophets. And he did. He became our custodian. He was the worst janitor I have ever met in my life. He was awful. He would not clean higher than he could reach. So he had cobwebs literally hanging from the ceiling, drooping. It was quite lovely when there was and sometimes he would strip the floors and then never wax them, which is awful. It's just awful. And it was worse. And there was other stuff. Didn't like to do bathrooms and and he didn't do windows. What did he do? But he talked a lot. But anyway, showed him Christ though. And he became their delegate to sit at convention one year. Marvelous. As far as I know, the first man I ever had a hand in converting to Christianity. As far as I know. Last verse. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will be reunited. They will appoint one leader, Christ, will come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. And, remember I showed you Nazareth is in part of the Jezreel Valley and so forth, so where Jesus taught. So Israel will be rescued. There will be reunion. There will be a remnant preserved. There is gospel here in this book. I've gone long. You've been very patient. We'll continue next week. Until then, God bless you all. Thanks for letting me do this. See you next time. You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.